Okay, so last we were looking at the situation of that group of all congruence classes modulo n, where the representative integers are relatively prime to n. We have already seen in a previous exercise that those congruence classes form a group under multiplication mod n, and the order of that group is phi of n, where phi is Euler's phi function. Now we can make use of this idea to get a result from number theory due to Euler, which you may probably already know. It's a generalization of another famous result due to Fermat from number theory regarding primes. So it is corollary three. It is the third corollary to Lagrange's theorem. And it is due to Euler, the Swiss mathematician Euler, Leonhard Euler. And the statement is this: if n is a positive integer, and a is an integer relatively prime to n. Okay, a need not be positive, n is positive, a is any integer relatively prime to n. Then a to the power phi of n is congruent to 1 modulo n. This congruence holds in general for any positive integer n and any integer a relatively prime to n. This is a number theoretic result, but we can now prove it using group theory, using what we have already seen. So the proof goes like this: let G be the group of all congruence classes mod n, where the representative integers are relatively prime to n. Then order of G we have already seen is phi of n, where phi is Euler's phi function. Hence, by corollary 2, by the previous corollary, we have this. Okay, let me write here itself. Okay, what we have written here is this: You see, this is the congruence class modulo n containing the integer a. Obviously there will be such a congruence class which will contain a, because all the congruence classes modulo n where the integers are relatively prime to n, they will appear among the congruence classes where the representative integers are relatively prime to n. So a will also appear in one such congruence class, and this will be the congruence class containing a, and this is an element of G. Okay, so by corollary 2, if we raise this to order of gth power, then we should get the identity element in this group, which we already know since our group has the binary operation multiplication modulo n. So the identity element is the congruence class modulo n containing 1. So this is just the direct application of corollary 2 in this particular group. Okay, so now what can we conclude from this? What does it actually mean? This implies so order of G is phi of n equal to 1, or now according to our definition of multiplication modulo n, see, this is one positive integer. Phi of n is ultimately the number of positive integers less than n and relatively prime to n. So phi of n itself is a positive integer. So if we raise this to this power, okay, then actually we are having this. It's like multiplying the congruence class A with itself, say 3 times. According to our definition of multiplication mod n, this is nothing but a times a times a. So just like that, phi of n times. Okay. Now these two congruence classes are saying if and only if their representatives are congruent to each other modulo n, according to the definition of these congruence classes, the equivalence classes, or this is equivalent to this and this is equivalent to this. Now if you are already aware of the group theoretic proof of this, number theoretic proof of this result, then you already know that we have to look at many things to get the proof. However, using group theory, we have a much shorter proof. It's a quick application of Lagrange's theorem, and that's it, that's the proof. And of course, it has its own corollary, which is Fermat's theorem, which is the special case where this modulus n is not any positive integer but a prime number. So that is corollary 4. And this is due to Fermat. So far I know, some people pronounce these names wrongly, although it looks like we should say Euler, but it's not Euler, it's Euler, O-I-L-E-R. Okay, just like that. So far I know, here T is silent, it's not Fermat, it's Fermat. And it's just this: if P is a prime number, and a is any integer then a to the power o, so they are writing it in this general form, is congruent to a modulo p. So here it's not, a is not restricted to be relatively prime to p, a can be any integer. So that means there will be two cases since or we can write it like this. First, assume that p divides a. Okay, a and p are not relatively prime, suppose. Then a to the power p is congruent to 0 mod p, because then a to the power p will also be divisible by p, and a is also congruent to 0 mod p. So using the fact that congruence modulo p is an equivalence relation, so we get this, which imply a to the power p is congruent to a mod p. Next, assume that p does not divide a. So if p does not divide a, then we already know that p and a are relatively prime, because the only positive divisors of p are 1 and p. Among them, if p does not divide a, then p cannot be a common divisor of a and p. So the only common divisor of a and p in that case is 1. So that is also the greatest common divisor. Then a and p are relatively prime. So by corollary 3 above, a to the power phi of p is congruent to 1 mod p, but phi of p is equal to p minus 1. You see, if we have a prime number, say for example, okay, let us take a somewhat big prime, not absolutely small, say 5, then all the integers less than 5 are actually relatively prime to 5, because 5 does not divide any one of them, simply because they are all less than 5. So 5 cannot divide any one of them, and we know that when a prime number does not divide an integer, then it becomes relatively prime to that integer. So for a prime, all the positive integers less than it are automatically relatively prime to it. So that means here, for example, we have 4 integers relatively prime to 5. So that's why if we have p, then the number of positive integers less than p and relatively prime to p is p minus 1, starting from 1 through p minus 1. Okay, so in this case, this congruence assumes a special form So now in place of phi of p, you have p minus 1. This is congruent to 1 mod p. This implies Just like an ordinary equation, you can multiply both sides of a congruence by an integer. This implies, so multiply both sides by a, you get a to the power p is congruent to a mod p. So that completes the proof. So in any case, whether p divides a or does not divide a, we end up with this congruence. So that is Fermat's theorem. Okay. Now there is yet another corollary. This is also very important. Corollary 5. This one does not go towards number theory, but it is group theoretic. If G is a finite group, if G is a finite group whose order is a prime number, P, then G is a cyclic group. This is a very nice result. Okay, let me just refill this so that I don't run out of ink in the middle. Just the fact that the order of a group is prime implies it's a cyclic group. See, that's what I like about group theory. Just that number, the number of elements determines the structure of the group. So that is really something very deep if you really think about it. Okay. Since order of G is equal to P, a prime number, there exists an element A that is different from the identity in G. That is because if G has only the identity element, if G is the trivial group consisting of only the identity element, then its order is 1, and 1 is not a prime number. P is always greater than 1. So that means whatever this number P may be, G will have at least one element that is different from the identity element. So we have chosen A to be one such element. Now we are going to make use of this element A. Now consider the cyclic subgroup of G generated by A. We already know what that subgroup is. It consists of all integral powers of A. Okay. So this is a subgroup of G, and G is a finite group. So according to Lagrange's theorem, the order of this subgroup should divide the order of the group G. Okay. Now, by Lagrange's theorem order of this cyclic subgroup divides the order of the group which is a prime number, and we already know that the only positive divisors of a prime number are 1 and the prime number itself. Since P is a prime number, it implies that the order of this cyclic subgroup is either 1 or P. Okay, but the order cannot actually be 1. Now, the element A itself belongs to the cyclic subgroup generated by A, because A equals A to the power 1. So by definition it belongs to the cyclic subgroup, and hence the cyclic subgroup is not equal to the trivial group consisting of the identity, because A itself is not equal to the identity. So since A is in this subgroup, so this subgroup cannot be the trivial group consisting of only the identity. This implies order of this cyclic subgroup is not equal to 1. So we must have order of the cyclic subgroup equal to P, but that is nothing but the order of the group. So that's why the cyclic subgroup must be equal to the group, because the group is a finite set and the cyclic subgroup is a subset, and they have the same number of elements. So that is possible only when they are equal, which implies this is equal to G. So G is a cyclic group. So now you can see that one of the exercises that we proved, which one I don't remember the number, but the exercise asked us to prove that any group of order 3 or 4 or 5 is abelian. So you can see that if the order is 3 or 5, then this new result tells us that the group is a cyclic group, and cyclic groups are automatically abelian. So from this result itself we can conclude that such groups are abelian. In fact, being cyclic is something more than being abelian. Abelian groups exist which are not necessarily cyclic, which are not cyclic. So we will come across one such example. So this is just to show that the things with which we struggle at one stage in this text, they are proved very easily with more advanced tools or results that we come across somewhat later in the book. Okay, now next comes a new section. We don't have any exercises at the end of this section. We then have the section 2.5. After that we have all the exercises combined. So this is section 2.5, a counting principle. Okay, now in this section we are going to generalize the idea of a right coset of a subgroup in a group. For a given group, G, a subgroup of G, a subgroup H of G, and an element A belonging to G, we have already seen that the right coset HA consists of all the elements of the form HA, small HA. Consists of all the elements of the form small ha, where H varies over the subgroup H. We are now going to generalize this idea. We shall now generalize this as follows. Okay, so this is a it's not given as a definition, it's just given as a discussion. Let H and K be two subgroups of a group G. We define HK, this product of two subgroups, to be the set of all elements that look like this HK, such that H belongs to H and K belongs to K. The definition is straightforward. You just take all the elements of H and you take all the elements of K, form all such possible products, take their collection. That set is called HK, is denoted by HK. Okay. Now, a natural question arises. Keep in mind that these H and K are not just any subsets of the group, they are subgroups, they have to be subgroups. For the, in fact, you can take arbitrary subsets and form such a product analogously, but that's not what we are doing here, because we are going to see some results which depend on the fact that H and K are subgroups. Okay, now a natural question that arises at this point is that whether HK itself is also a subgroup. Unfortunately, that is not always true, but we want to determine when it is true, when HK is a subgroup of G. And for that, let us take a specific example and see the situation in that example. Let us take an, or let me just pose the question here itself. Is HK a subgroup of G let us take an example. In S3, recall our familiar group, the symmetric group of degree 3, which consists of all the bijective mappings of a set having 3 elements onto itself under the composition of mappings as binary operation. Now, in S3, let H be the set consisting of the identity mapping and the mapping phi. If you recall, phi is the mapping that sends 1 to 2, 2 to 1, and it keeps 3 fixed. And we also had a mapping psi it sends 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and 3 to 1, and we then saw what the elements of S3 are in terms of these two mappings. Okay, so this is one subset. As of now, it's a subset, and let K be the set consisting of the identity mapping and phi psi. We can quickly see, in fact, what phi psi is. I also don't remember at this stage. If we calculate phi psi, 1 will go to 2 and 2 will go to 3. That means phi psi sends 1 to 3. 2 goes to 1, 1 goes to 2. So phi psi does not change 2. So 3 should go to 1. Phi psi interchanges 1 and 3 and keeps 2 fixed. Okay. Now our first job is to see that these two subsets are actually subgroups. Note that they are subsets in a finite group. So according to one result that we have seen in this in the previous section of verifying when a subset is a non-empty subset is a subgroup. So it's enough to verify that these two sets are closed under the binary operation. Now for that also we need not check E, because if you do anything with E, you are either going to get E or something else with which you are working. So that thing is going to be inside the set itself. So in this specific case, the only products we have to check or verify are phi square and phi psi whole square. If they belong to their respective sets, then the sets are subgroups. Note that phi square is the identity and phi psi square is also the identity. So both H and K are subgroups of S3. Both of them are subgroups of S3. Okay, now because they are subgroups, we now want to calculate HK for this special H and K. So we will take all the elements of H and all the elements of K and form the products. So first, if we form the product with E as the left hand factor, then that does not affect anything. E is E, E phi psi is phi psi. So we get E and phi psi. But then if we multiply by phi, phi e is phi and phi times phi psi is phi square psi. Okay, let me just write phi e is equal to phi. We will do the calculation here itself, and phi psi is equal to phi square psi, but phi square is identity, so that will not be there, and we end up with this. So we see that the subset Hk of G consists of 4 different mappings. They are all distinct. This is identity, this is phi psi, this is phi. Phi is clearly not equal to phi psi because psi is not the identity element, and this is psi, which is also different than different from all of these 3. Since order of Hk, that means order of this subset, the number of elements in this subset is 4, and 4 does not divide 6, which is the order of the group.